Hello and welcome to the webinar, Biotechnology and Tanneries, the Future of Sustainable Leather, brought to you by ILM in association with raw materials pricing website, the SAL Report. I'm Martin Ricker, the Content Director of International Leather Maker, the leading leather industry business information brand. I would like to acknowledge our webinar sponsor, Evolve by Nature. The company's co-founder and CEO, Dr. Gregory Altman, will deliver our keynote presentation today. Evolve by Nature believes that a strong partnership between the leather making and biotech industries can solve pressing health and environmental issues and bring leather production forward into a sustainable future. Its specialized silk protein molecules form the basis for sustainable alternatives to leather finishing chemicals. In this webinar, Dr. Altman will explain how biotech innovations are a key building block for a healthier future. Before we start with the presentation, I would like to give a brief introduction to International Leather Maker. ILM serves the global leather supply chain across several media platforms, online and through a number of other digital formats, as well as 6 printed magazines. The website www.internationalleathermaker.com is updated several times daily with the latest industry news, views and information. Please keep an eye out for further upcoming webinars and other digital events which will be announced on our website. We also broadcast a series of industry-specific free-to-download podcasts which form part of our View from the Top series. You can access all of the podcasts by visiting our homepage. So now I'm delighted to introduce today's keynote presenter, Dr. Gregory Altman from Evolve by Nature. His presentation is titled Biotechnology and Tanneries, the Future of Sustainable Leather. Following the presentation, Dr. Altman will join me for a live Q&A. During the webinar, if there are any questions that you would like me to put to him, please leave it with your name and your company name. You can post a question using the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Any questions that we haven't covered today can be forwarded to our presenter so they can respond afterwards. Over to you, Dr. Altman.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Greg Altman, CEO and co-founder of Evolve by Nature. Today, I really look forward to speaking to you about sustainable biotechnology for leather. I have a PhD in biotechnology engineering and a bachelor's of science in chemistry. But more importantly, I've been involved in the use of natural silk and natural silk protein to advance health for the majority of my career. Really look forward to introducing you to our company, Evolve by Nature, and what we really stand for and what we're trying to accomplish working with you in the leather industry. We're really a new type of biotechnology company. We are working with nature in a symbiotic relationship to harvest molecules that evolution and the world and ecology have already pretty much perfectly designed, and using technology to make those available. And why are we trying to do that? Well, as a molecule creation company, Evolve by Nature is trying to usher in the new and next generation of products. We believe that we need to create a healthier relationship between people, the planet, and the products that we use. And the leather industry has a huge opportunity to advance that mission. And in advancing that mission, we're actually working to advance health, not just the health of the planet, but the health of all of those species that actually share our world. So today we're going to talk about why biotechnology is the future of the leather industry. But I'd also like to add that you are the future of the leather industry. And if we could work together with new technologies, nature, and everything that we've learned over centuries, if not millennia, working with the skins of animals and the symbiotic relationship between humans and leather and how we have co-evolved, we really stand to advance this field and advance this industry for the next several hundred years and thousands thereafter. So why do we need biotechnology? Well, the reality is we don't need biotechnology if we had all of the tools truly necessary to create both sustainable and circular materials. So today we're going to talk mainly throughout the entire course of the presentation about how biotechnology can help us achieve these goals. But the reality is today, in many of our products, we have components, molecules, ingredients, substrates, materials, dyes, finishing agents that do not always take into consideration the upstream consequences of production and the downstream end of life consequences of those materials and components. So here you see basically all of our ecology. You see water in the clouds, you see soil, oxygen, CO2. And in our industry today, we can impact all of these for better or for worse. And right now, when we think about making product, we are driven by profit, as we should be. We need to stay in business. We need to support our employees. Our employees need to support their families. That is the economy in which we live. But there is another economy at play, and that is the circular economy. And it's the economy that basically says, if we don't support our earth and our ecosystem, well, then there's going to be no place for us to work pretty soon. And so what we have to think about is, what are the materials that we are using? How are they produced? What were the processes used to produce those materials? Did those processes release any toxicants into the environment? Did they pollute a water supply at a local community across an ocean from us? And when we're making leather, what's happening at the literal hands of the tanner? What is that body being exposed to? What kinds of chemicals can actually be used for performance, but also, even if necessary, penetrate the human skin and toxify our own bodies? And then what happens when today we abide by the history of the leather industry and we bury our waste, maybe in an agricultural field, expecting that that leather would biodegrade, and it can't, because we're using chemicals and components that maybe once came from the earth, but they're synthesized and they're no longer able to biodegrade. So could we imagine a world where we can deliver performance potentials, where we can deliver that new article that will last for hundreds of years, that could be passed down generation to generation? And when that article has met its end of life, it can be buried, and all of the components can be biodegradable. And what do we mean by biodegradable? There's a lot of debate around that. Biodegradable means that there's usually an enzyme somewhere in the ecosystem that can literally chew or chop up the material. In the case of leather, it actually starts out as biodegradable. But when we start to address performance potentials like color fixation, longevity, mechanical wear, we start to use petrochemicals. We're all aware of them. We've heard of them. We have them in our homes: polyurethanes, polyethylenes, acrylates, fixation agents. All of these materials, if used incorrectly, will not break down, and they will prevent the ability of our leather from either biodegrading in the environment or actually being recyclable or upcyclable. So whether or not we're using natural animal skins to create leather, or we're using those animal skins at end of life to create recycled leather, or there are even new substrates coming to market that hopefully are produced in a sustainable fashion, we have to think about the other components that are used on those substrates and how they are going to exist in a circular economy. Now, why do we have to think this way? Well, I'll tell you, the reality is, for a very long time, certain industries have put a lot of pressure on consumers to basically be the cleanup agents of the environment. You know, dear consumer, do a better job recycling at home. You know, don't worry about the industry. If each of us pitch in and recycle that plastic cup, we're going to be okay. And the reality is, consumers have gotten wise to that marketing message. And consumers have realized that they now need to use their voice and their purse to truly affect change. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is by applying, as a consumer, pressure on our brands. And our brands, therefore, need to apply pressure onto our manufacturing processes and our products and our tanners and the leather industry as a whole. So everybody wants more sustainable options. We all hear that. We all believe in that. And in fact, that is why Evolved by Nature exists. Evolved by Nature exists to advance the world's health. And one of the ways that we believe we're going to advance the world's health is by delivering performance in a sustainable way. And performance is the key. Right now, if you delivered an inferior article to your customer, to your brand, and that brand to their customer, as much as that consumer wants sustainability, they will not repurchase that product, guaranteed. So what consumers and brands are really asking for is a continued promise of performance, but that we all do better from a sustainability perspective. So how do we do that? How do we deliver on what the market needs? What I would like to do is introduce you to our definition at Evolved by Nature of biotechnology. Before we go into what it means at Evolved by Nature, let's just talk about the context of that word for a brief second. We typically think about biotechnology in the pharmaceutical industry, leveraging nature, leveraging tools that we have learned from how nature operates, and applying those tools in a variety of different circumstances to affect a biological change. And so biotechnology has been truly defined and limited, at least from an investment and market perspective, to that pharmaceutical industry. But if you believe that the essence of biotechnology is to advance health, to improve health, then we need to expand the definition one ring larger. And that is where we think about biotechnology as the combination or use of technology with nature, with biology. How do we let biology and nature shine? How can we take the technology and the technological tools developed by this industry and apply them to the natural materials that exist out there? For us, we look at the silk cocoon, the natural silk cocoon, in an equivalent way that many of the petrochemical companies looked at crude oil and fracked gas. We bioharvest molecules from nature. In this case, the cocoon is a gold mine. I'll talk about in a minute why it is also one of the best sustainable feedstocks we could possibly imagine. But we should appreciate that the natural silk cocoon is a natural silk fiber. And by definition, it's a polymer. And in fact, it's one of the most advanced polymers ever invented. It's 1 million years in the making. And one of the beautiful things about the silk cocoon is that you can bioharvest molecules from this amazing polymer, creating monomers that then can be used not to form fibers again, but to form coatings. And in fact, to almost coat any surface you can possibly imagine, whether that surface is on leather, on a recycled hide, on the human skin, or even inside the human body. The technology that we've developed is called activated silk. Activated silk does not represent one single protein or peptide. It actually represents an entire class of molecules that we are able to harvest from this beautiful feedstock. And again, what we're doing here is we're taking advantage of biology. We are not trying to think that we could outsmart nature. Nature has already done the work for us. We're just trying to use our technology to make it available. So what is the biotechnology that you're familiar with? There are many kinds that we've used. Here are just a few examples. So let's talk about vitamin C. It's required, right? We actually need it in collagen synthesis. If your body doesn't have vitamin C, we suffer from a disease called scurvy. But we discovered a long time ago, it's a lot easier to walk around with a pill in your pocket than 10 oranges and squeeze those oranges whenever you're actually feeling a little bit low. So we figured out using tools of synthesis that we can actually use naturally derived ingredients to bring vitamin C molecules together and to make them active. We've also used biotechnology processes to extract vitamin C from that orange juice and from many other sources. And on the right, what we probably all need right now is a little bit more biotechnology in the form of a glass of wine. But let's talk about why wine has co-evolved with humans, besides for all of the obvious reasons. associated with stress and COVID and the environment. It's just another way and reminder of me saying I hope you all are doing very well. But when you look at the making of wine, it's a biological process. It's a natural process called fermentation. The beautiful thing about making wine is that the feedstock for this process is the grape. And inside that grape, you have everything you need from a natural supply to make a product that humans, most humans, rely on. So let's think about that for a second. So we make wine. So on that grape are the yeast cells that will convert the sugar that is inside the grape to alcohol. And if we basically give it time and we grow the vines in proper soil, we create a symbiotic relationship. But we'll also talk about other forms of fermentation and genetic engineering in a minute. But let's just acknowledge how biotechnology can coexist in harmony with the earth and the environment. We're not chopping down our vineyards every year. We're not planting annual plants. We have a deep respect for how these materials interact with the soil. And we have a deep respect for the fact that the fuel source for the making of our wine is sugar, and that sugar is coming truly from the sun and solar power into the leaves, and the leaves being able to harvest that energy to create sugar. In other processes, that sugar has to come from other agricultural crops, and we have to think long and hard about what are the energy sources for those agricultural crops. Is it truly the sun, or is it the synthetic fertilizer that is actually used to maintain the health and energy inside the soil? And where does that synthetic fertilizer come from? Does it come from petrochemicals, or does it come from some other source? So positive signs and evidence of biotechnology at work for humans. But things can get a little out of control. So here, unless we're truly interested in new forms of exotic skin, the notion that we should actually genetically manipulate DNA and insert DNA into cells and have those cells produce molecules that have never existed on this earth before for the purpose of advancing the leather industry, or for the purpose of advancing other materials such that we can create material independence, we have to think long and hard about what those processes are dependent upon. From an upstream perspective, what is the true energy source? Is it organically harvested sugar, like the grape? Or does that sugar come from an industrial crop that is potentially devastating an ecosystem and relying on fossil fuel derived raw ingredients like synthetic fertilizers? And we also have to think about what happens when different forms of biotechnology, as shown here in Jurassic Park, frankly get a little out of control. What happens when those genetically modified cells that are being used to grow or make new materials and new molecules for the leather industry actually have to be terminated? What levels of toxic cleaning ingredients are we going to need to ensure that all of the equipment is clean day in and day out? So as much as we love the word biotechnology, we have to make sure that we think about it within the context of what we're trying to achieve, and that is performance and sustainability, and the two have to be linked together. So why do we like silk as our feedstock? As I alluded to earlier, one of the most amazing inventions of nature is silk. Another phenomenal invention is collagen. And that is where these two materials come beautifully together in the leather industry. So you have a collagen-based substrate in the form of a harvested skin. And in this case, we're working on creating finishing chemistry derived from nature's other marvel, silk fibrine. That is the official name of the protein that the silkworm makes. But let's look at the upstream and downstream consequences of working with natural silk. So what is the fuel source of silk? Well, believe it or not, it's solar power. What we do to make silk is we plant mulberry trees, mulberry bushes. What most people don't know is we harvest a portion of the leaves in each season from those mulberry trees. And those leaves alone are the energy source to silkworms. Silkworms eat those leaves, and while ingesting CO2, they start to produce silk. In a way, the silkworm is our biofactory. And there's a beautiful aspect to this. One is that the mulberry trees actually grow like weeds. So they actually could be planted in contaminated soil. They can actually be used to clean up the soil. They're not an annual crop. And so they could also be used to resist and help support soil erosion. Mulberry leaves are not only a good food for silkworms, but they're also a good food for other animals. And the harvesting of mulberry and the production of silk cocoons have lifted communities, small, rural, urban, out of poverty around the world. And what most people don't understand is that you can actually, after the silk cocoon is produced, terminate cellular differentiation in a cruelty-free way. And it's happening all around the world on 6 of the 7 continents we know of. Now, the pupa, which is neither a silkworm nor a silk moth, is harvested and is actually used as a food supply. In 92 countries around the world, that food supply goes to support human food chains, but it could also be used as a food supply for fish and for chicken, which then further supports local economies. And for us, those silk cocoons are cut in half. They're thrown away. They're literally the trash of the sericulture industry. And that's what we actually purchase. And we then start to think about what are the contributions to making those activated silk molecules available to the leather industry and to others as well that are interested in driving performance naturally. And so what we do is we basically have 3 ingredients. We need heat, we need water, and we need salt. And the beautiful thing about all of those is that the energy that goes to producing the heat, we take care to make sure it comes from a renewable source, in particular wind energy. We are working on actually even recycling heat. We're working on recycling salt, and we're working on recycling the water. And that is because when we process the cocoons to gain access to the silk fibrine, we're not in need of any toxic chemicals. And we're not in need of cleaning our equipment because we've genetically modified some cells that could get out of control and get into our water supply. So in fact, all of our water, if we were to discharge it, does not require treatment. And so in that case, both the process of producing the biomass of silk fibrine is completely circular. The process that we are working on to make the natural wonders of silk available to the industry is also becoming circular. And here's the beautiful thing. Once we apply activated silk to leather, it will perform. In fact, in many instances, it will actually outperform synthetic chemistry. Why? Well, synthetic chemistry was designed in many instances in light of the protein structure and sequence of silk. Silk was our inspiration in the 1930s and 40s to molecules like rayon and nylon and others. So all we're doing is making one of the most advanced performance polymers and monomers available to you, but we're respecting the circular life cycle and the circular economy while we're doing this. And now you have a leather product that is in your hands in terms of being able to advance health. So let's talk about the benefits of natural, sustainable biotechnology. One of the things that we can do is we can use sustainable and natural finishing chemistry to create biodegradable and compostable articles. So what if we could take a veg tan skin, finish it with a natural material that will provide enhancements to color fixation and to look and to feel and to haptics. But at the end of life, when we're done with it, we can feel comfortable that there are enzymes in the soil that will not only degrade the silk finishing chemistry, but will also eat it up as an amino acid protein shape. What are the other reasons why we need to make a move? Well, as I mentioned, not all biotechnology is created equal. But if we look to those materials and those companies that are truly considering the upstream consequences of their feedstock and their fuel sources, we can actually work together in the leather industry to reduce climate impact. I know there is tremendous pressure on the leather industry right now in terms of animal husbandry and the effects of over production of livestock. But that is a system that needs to come into balance on its own. And for so long as we are eating meat and harvesting animals and animal skin in a humane way, the reality is leather is a waste product, much like the silk cocoon is a waste product. And if we work together, we truly can start to think about how we can affect climate change. More importantly, many of the chemicals that we use can be eliminated today, where if we truly study the upstream production processes of those chemicals, the chemicals themselves, the excess of those chemicals in the tannery that need to be put down the water drain, that then need to be treated such that the tannery could be somewhat close in proximity to human civilization, we need to think about reducing polluted runoff. And more importantly, it's also about doing all of this for the health of the people that are exposed most to those chemicals. And it's not just the consumer, and we obviously know it's the tanner. So what can activated silk do for the leather industry? Well, we've been hard at work for the past 4 years figuring that out ourselves, and we've been working with many of you to help us figure out how to address the needs that you have to make sure that your business is sustainable for the future, and not just from a climate perspective, but from an economical perspective. Right now, we've all heard of the promises of biotechnology and advanced materials, and then you always ask us, how much does it cost? And we're going to increase the price on you, not just twofold, threefold, but 100-fold. And unfortunately, that's not sustainable. So let's talk about what we can do. We can actually use natural silk protein in liquid form, and we can spray it onto the surface of leather after it's been tanned, after it's been dyed, even before it's been dyed. And we can use the performance potentials of the silk molecules we create to reduce the need for polyurethane, to reduce the need for acrylates. Because silk is such a great polymer and it inherently binds to collagen, we can also improve color fastness to rubbing. We can improve color fastness to PVC migration on Nubuck. So whether it's full grain materials, Nubuck, even in our innovation pipeline, some advances we expect to release shortly on suede, the idea of helping to upcycle natural leather, the ability to help create recycled leather, and the ability to usher new sustainable substrates into the marketplace. We all need advanced finishing chemistry that works in harmony with our ecosystem. So in terms of reduction in polyurethane, this is not, science fiction. This is very simple, and it exists today, and the technology is readily available. We can use activated silk in a very small amount to reduce, in some cases, upwards of 100% of your common use of polyurethane. And why is this important? Well, much like consumers found out that they were not entirely responsible for addressing climate change on their own, consumers are also going to find out that advertised sustainable materials and sustainable matrices, well, if those sustainable materials are literally coated in plastic and go from sustainable to non-degradable, or in fact, continue to drive the use of polymers used in finishing chemistry that they themselves have toxic upstream production processes, we're going to lose the faith of the consumer and the brands alike. And so we have to be clear about all of the materials and components used in production. We can't just talk about the substrate without talking about the finishing chemistry, and we can't talk about finishing chemistry if we don't start to talk about what is actually in it. And so the ability to start to replace polyurethane with activated silk can be, if we work together, a massive improvement and contribution to improving the world's health. What are some of the other things that we can do? Well, we can improve color fastness to rubbing because silk in its activated state has a high affinity for both collagen and dye. So when we spray our silk finishing agents onto leather, we can improve wet Veslic and dry Veslic scores dramatically. And why is this important? Why is performance important? Well, how about thinking about decreasing waste? If our skins go into a production process and get turned into an article, and then that article, after all of its work and all of the CO2 to transport it around the world, fails performance potentials and we can't sell it and we have to throw it away and put it in the trash, that's not very sustainable. So improving performance naturally is an incredible contribution to improving sustainability. And here's another example. Previous one was on full grain. Here we have Nubuck. How can we actually use a natural finishing agent, activated silk, sprayed on Nubuck? It will prevent the migration of your dye into PVC. Very important from the shoe and sneaker industry. Ways again to decrease waste in the production process by improving performance naturally. So what are we really talking about here? We're really talking about combining two of nature's most incredible inventions and using a little bit of innovation and a little bit of technology to truly advancing the health of the world. And we need your help to do it. And one of the ways was described in some of the earlier slides. We believe that if we start to make small changes, a 30% reduction in the use of polyurethane on every square foot of natural leather produced, we can start to remove 2 million tons of petrochemicals that don't have a place in our ecosystem after they are created, and the production of which leads to additional toxification of our environment. Small changes with technology that nature invented, that evolved by nature is already made available and can commercially provide to you today. Together, we can start to make a massive impact on this earth. So a small change, and we've done the math, 2 million tons of toxic petrochemical ingredients, finishing agents, and dyes removed from our ecosystem. But we need to work together to do it. So I really appreciate your time today. And I know I've given you a lot to think about. Certainly look forward to engaging with you and very much appreciate your time. And one more reminder that in terms of biotechnology, you all are part of biotechnology as we speak. And we all together are responsible for advancing the health of this world and doing so in a profitable and ecological manner. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Greg. I'll just wait for the next slide to be loaded. Just to mention now that we're going to do the Q&A, and if Greg could join me. As I mentioned earlier on, you can post a question to Greg using the control panel on your screen. If there's any questions that we haven't covered today, we'll obviously forward to Greg and he can respond to you afterwards. From what I've seen, Greg, there's just one question that we've got from the audience at the moment, and it's, do we need to take into account animal welfare of silkworms?
Absolutely. I think we have to take into account animal welfare, period, full stop. I think we have to be responsible citizens. The process and coevolution of the silkworm that we currently refer to in common tongue, the B. morii silkworm, has a process that enables just really exciting and circular dynamics in both a food chain, agriculture, and what we call sericulture environment. So I think we have to pay particular attention to how our silkworms are treated, how the silk polymer is raised. And the very good news is if you invest in your supply chain, you can find partners out there. One of the most exciting aspects of sericulture, the agricultural process of raising silkworms, is that it actually supports local communities around the world, both in urban and rural environments. And if you actually study the history of sericulture, that is probably 5,000 plus years old, it has raised communities out of poverty pretty much anywhere. And in the light of climate change, where we are dealing with climate uncertainty, there is almost no better crop than the mulberry that can grow in drought-resistant environments as well as wetlands. And so it's an environment and agriculture crop that if you treat with respect, will actually treat the earth and humans alike with respect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've got another question here. How robust? Sorry, this is from Andrew Cornelius. Bear with me. How robust is activated silk finish in relation to automotive test standards for leathers?
That's a great question. So what we know between the luxury fashion industry and automotive industry is in the automotive, we are technically applying many, many more layers of whether it's a polyurethane or different types of polymers. So the reality is on a layer by layer equivalency, it is incredibly robust. And from an automotive perspective, we have to study it in that specific process. We've been primarily focused on fashion at the moment, but we see great potential in automotive, especially as you see the automotive industry starting to think about ways to achieve sustainability. I'm not sure getting rid of leather is actually the right way to achieve sustainability, and going to synthetic fabric, not exactly sure how that's tied together. But for us, we actually see great potential, not just in automotive, but also furniture. But I believe with the pressure on fashion right now, we have a great opportunity to make that change that we all need more publicly available.
Mm-hmm. And this is a question for Patrick, from Patrick Dorgan. Are samples available for R&D purposes in the US?
Yes, absolutely. You can contact us at Evolved by Nature. Just check out our website, and there's a little form there. We're happy to engage in any kind of research.
Mm-hmm. Noel Gillet is asking, is 100% silk finish film biodegradable?
Yes, and edible. So that's one of the exciting things about silk, especially in its activated state. We know for certain that enzymes produced by bacteria in the soil are certainly readily primed and able to degrade the amino acid chemical backbones of the silk protein. That's one of the most exciting things about the use of protein-based materials like silk.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question here. I don't know who the questioner is, but they've said, what is the contraction or the shrinkage temperature of skins that are tanned with this silk? I'm not sure they are tanned with it, but you could clarify that.
Yeah, so to be clear, there is potential for certain activated silk molecules to behave much like a vegetable tannin in terms of a chemistry perspective. We do not currently use silk as a tanning agent, so I'm not able to answer that question directly. Plus, it always depends on the entire process. But one of the comments that I was making, and I think a future aspect for the industry to consider is, in many ways, vegetable tannin is sometimes inferior due to color and other issues, sometimes even longevity and performance. But if we can actually improve those performance potentials, that is a certainly new direction for the industry to consider. And that's something we're very much focused on, along with, aniline leathers that require very little finishing chemistry. How can we help improve the less finished, less processed leathers?
Mm-hmm. And Diana Tay has asked, she joined the webinar late, but if you could give us a bit more explanation about what you mean by activated.
Sure. So most people know silk in a non-activated state. The protein, you should think about it as a string that can coil up very tightly into a spring-like structure. And so when we come into contact with silk in the fiber form, that protein is already in a spring, and it's already set, it's already polymerized, it's already bonded. The innovation that evolved by nature is that we have figured out a way how to open up that string into its primary protein state. And now it is primed to actually bind with anything to get out of the presence of water. Silk really doesn't like the water that we put it in. So it is activated and it is now ready to bind to collagen. It could bind with other silk proteins and find a fiber-like form. But what we mean by activated is that it's now ready to polymerize. And the key difference between silk and many other polymers and even GMO silks, that GMO silks, when they're produced, they come out of the purification process folded and they really lose their performance potential. And that's what we mean.
Okay. And then, I mean, I've got just a quick question for you. How long does the production process take to create the activated silk for like a usable product for like a leather finish or a finish for leather making?
So for Evolved by Nature specifically, it's I believe a 24 to 48 hour process. That obviously doesn't take into account the seasonal process of growing the mulberry and the sericulture process. But for us, it's fairly robust. And just to put it into perspective, today we can produce about 100 metric tons of activated silk a year, and by the end of next year, we'll be somewhere around 300 metric tons, and that scalability is nearly infinite, with the supply chain being highly elastic. So there's great potential to make massive change.
Okay. And Marcus Valero is asking, is a special treatment necessary in the finish?
In our finish?
Yeah.
No, if I understand the question specifically, our finish is applied just like any other ingredient in that final formula, whether or not you're making a top coat. Our activated silk can work alone. It works in combination with much of the standard chemistry that is applied in the leather industry as well. But no, we are supplying pure protein and water.
Okay. Is it applied in the tannery like through a spray machine or roller coater or both?
Absolutely. And one of the nice things about the finish is that it's an aqueous-based monomer system. So in the tannery, you're mixing it with your standard cocktail. One of the things that we're able to do specifically is if your cocktail previously contained X% of acrylate or X% of polyurethane, now all of a sudden we could start to reduce that concentration by including the activated silk. And that's where we can start to make real change, because we're not asking the tanner to change the way in which we commonly work. And that I think is the key to making systematic, worldwide change. We work in the process that the tanner is currently used to.
Great. And Tim Kidd has asked, have you done any life cycle analysis of your silk versus, for example, another bio-based polymers?
We have life cycle analyses. You don't tend to compare to other materials because you need that other material to have conducted the LCA, and most people don't share their LCAs, but our LCA is peer reviewed and available under NDA to our partners. Absolutely, it's the first step to being successful in trying to achieve a sustainable future. And I love that question, and I'd recommend we make sure we get LCAs from all new promises and materials coming to market.
Yeah. And Anka Monshine has asked, you said you use salt in the activation silk process. Is that salt still in the final solution when it's applied to the leather?
No, because if it is, then the silk will actually never activate. So we use the salt to put it into the primary structure that I mentioned earlier. But if we want the silk to activate and bind, we have to remove all of the salt. And that is one of the exciting things about what we're working on right now, is that one of the downsides right now to our process that we've identified is that there is, extraction of natural resources in the form of salt. And so that's the one area that we're certainly thinking about. And the beautiful thing is, because we have to remove the salt, we should be able to recycle it. And so our process engineering team is already working on that. So it'll actually help to bring costs down for everyone, and it'll actually decrease the need for natural resource extraction.
Yeah. I mean, the salt in the process is a big issue for the leather industry, full stop. So, yeah.
Not all salts are created equal. So yes, it's a very big industry. It's a very big industry concern.
Yeah. And another question from Diana. Do you source organic mulberries or are they unspecified?
So I'll tell you, it's a great question, and it doesn't have an easy answer. The simple answer is yes. We source organic mulberry, so we ensure that pesticides are not used or not sprayed. And in fact, sericulture in many ways has to be organic. If you spray a leaf with a pesticide, the silkworm's not going to eat it. So that's the good news. The bad news is the ability and energy and economics required to get certified, quote unquote, organic, much like a food supply, is very difficult for many of our rural communities that are invested in silk production. So we work with them. We will bear the brunt of that acknowledgement if they work with us and fully disclose their chemistry. While they may be working on quote unquote certification, we know and can feel confident that they are producing the product organically. And in many ways, I know in the presentation I talked about synthetic fertilizer. One of the coolest things about LCA analysis that we did is there's actually a natural fertilizer produced by the silkworm that could be used. So again, I didn't really highlight that, but it's a truly beautiful circular crop that has existed well before the invention of petrochemistry. So we're certainly fully aware that the process is organic, and we just have to make sure we don't let pesky chemicals that we don't like make its way into the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Greg, I'm going to make this one the last question, and then any of those that we get through, I'll certainly forward on to you to respond to the questioners. So the final question again is from Marcus, and he says, according to ISO 11640, how many wet rubs does it resist with Vestlic?
that is, Martin, I would encourage you to talk to our innovation and development teams, and they would be happy to one, qualify that question based on obviously the type of skin and finish that we're using, and yeah, definitely give you the information that we can. But again, it's a fairly robust polymer. We have to remember that for the past 70 years, we've been designing polymers to try to be more like silk. So the fact that we've made one of the more premium polymers available, we shouldn't worry that something comes from a natural source and then immediately think that it's going to lack performance.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Greg. I think we'll end the question and answer session there. I think it's a really interesting presentation and technology. I think it's bang on trend with the leather industry. Thank you very much for your time today. So if you want to switch off your camera and microphone, I'll just wrap up.
Will do. Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. Take care.
So that concludes our webinar for today. A huge thank you to Greg for sharing his thoughts and ideas on how new biotechnologies can help tanners make more sustainable leathers. I would also like to thank Evolved by Nature once again for their sponsorship. We'll be posting the full webinar online shortly in case you would like to listen to it again. A link to the recording will be sent out to everyone who registered for today's presentation. And finally, you will be asked a short survey about today's webinar, which will give us valuable feedback to ensure we're offering content that continues to be of interest to you. As mentioned at the beginning, ILM and the SAR report will be hosting more free to attend webinars, as well as new podcasts over the coming weeks and months. So please keep an eye out for future topics on our website, and our contact details can be seen obviously on the screen in front of you. Thank you for listening and watching, and goodbye. Thank you very much.